Hi, welcome back. We're on the Theism handout. Last time we talked about the nature of God and some of the objections to God as creator. Right now I want to go to number 7, and we want to make a distinction between general revelation and special revelation and talk about the relationship between the two, because this is where theists will see the necessity for scripture. This looks like a good exam question. I would ask this: what is the definition of general revelation, special revelation, and what is the relationship between the two? So you should put that on a note card, memorize it, put it in your long-term memory. All right, so let's start with general revelation. So remember, God reveals himself through what he does. And general revelation is God's revealing what he does to everyone. So general revelation is what can be known of God, what can be known about God by all people everywhere at all times. So this is what the uneducated, abused kid in Ubangi could know. Everybody could know what is general revelation. Okay, so this is from the created order, from the nature of humans, from what philosophy can give us. Okay, special revelation, though, notice the difference. General's for everyone. Special revelation, written as scripture, is what can be known of God through transmission alone. So God tells Moses, write this down, and Moses writes it down and commits it to the priests, and the priests tell the people. God tells this prophet, write this down. Isaiah, write this down, and he writes it down. So God speaks to individuals in time, and they write it down, and it becomes scripture, which is first shared with the Hebrews, and then the Christians receive more revelation, special revelation, and then later Islam is going to claim to receive even more. So it's through God speaking directly to people. So it's special because it's not to everyone, and it isn't given to the whole world so that it's clear like general revelation is. It's clear if you have it to read. But why do the theists believe we need special revelation? What's the purpose of it? So this is the relationship between the two. So the line here, scripture as redemptive revelation. Notice it has a redemptive element. Scripture as redemptive revelation assumes the reality of moral evil in the denial of clear general revelation. So general revelation, what is known about God, what could be known about God to everyone, is clear to everyone, but people don't see it because of moral evil. So moral evil in theism is the denial of what is clear about God from general revelation. And because moral evil is in the world, humans are in a condition of spiritual death. So they need redemption from that condition of spiritual death. Redemptive revelation is the story of how God will be merciful and just to humans in the condition of moral evil. So we should anticipate the theists answering the question, how can God be infinitely just, which says moral evil must be paid for, there must be a punishment for it, and infinitely merciful, which says cancel the punishment, cancel the penalty, redeem humanity? How could that happen? So that's what special revelation should answer. And if it doesn't answer that, we shouldn't be satisfied with it. All right, so general revelation, what can be known about God by all persons everywhere at all times. Special revelation is scripture, and it's what can be known by transmission alone. And scripture, the purpose of it is redemptive revelation from moral evil, which is the denial of what is clear about God from general revelation. I hope that's clear. I know this could be hard to get your head around, but think of it this way. God revealed himself in the created order. Human beings did not see it. This results in moral evil and spiritual death, and they need to be redeemed from that condition. That's the story of Scripture, if it is Scripture. Okay, so there's a test for Scripture in theism. All right, now we should talk about the relationship between faith and reason. This is part of the philosophy of religion. So we're sort of getting into philosophy of religion in this lecture. And philosophy of religion might be interesting to you. This is a kind of deep study of questions about the existence and nature of God, faith and reason, the problem of evil. I teach a whole class on philosophy of religion, and we take this handout and expand it pretty much for the whole semester, maybe even all of metaphysics we do. So if this is interesting to you, you might look into the philosophy of religion. All right, but what's the relationship between faith and reason? Well, what is faith? Some people say faith is believing in what you can't prove or what you can't understand. But that's not necessarily true. That's what we've been calling fideism. And fideism has a history as well. And maybe it's an attitude that's in all religions. We really can't know these things, so we just have to believe to maintain meaning. But that's not the same as faith. So in theism, in the New Testament, there's a quote: "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen." Or faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. So it's the evidence of things hoped for. So think about that. Things we hope for we don't see right now. You probably hope to graduate from school one day. It's something in the future. You don't have it right now. So hope has to do with future things. And faith is the evidence of things unseen. So notice there's a connection between evidence and unseen. So you don't see the day of your graduation, but do you have evidence to believe that you are going to reach that day? I think you probably do, right? So what evidence do you have that you will graduate one day? Probably you've finished high school, you've graduated before, you've taken college classes, you've made it this far, you know how to take notes, you know how to study. So you probably have evidence for this hope that you're going to graduate, and it's also not seen. So faith is like that. And it is for things in metaphysics, like God, the existence of God. Could we have evidence that God exists? Well, I think we've just gone through several weeks of that. Matter exists, matter's not eternal, the soul exists, the soul is not eternal. Notice I gave you a series of arguments. Those arguments are evidence, proofs. So evidence sometimes in our day is only considered to be empirical evidence, what you can see. So if you can't see God, then you have no evidence. Well, that's only if you're an empiricist, if you rely on your senses as the only source of evidence. But this whole class should have helped you see that there's rational evidence. That's the primary sense of evidence. It's giving arguments, reasons. It's primary in philosophy. So let me go over this again. Faith is the substance, and substance is the support, the underlying stuff that holds it together. The substance of what you hope for, the support, and the evidence of things unseen. So there's support and there's evidence for things unseen, like God, like the soul, like the future. Those are things that you understand through reason, and faith is that understanding. You understand it has to be that way because you've gotten there through reason. Okay, so that's the definition of faith we're going to use, not fideism. Those two are not the same thing. Fideism is blind faith, blind belief. Faith has reasons. So reason supports faith. So if we were to do what's more basic, reason is more basic than faith, just like meaning is more basic than truth. And reason grasps meaning, faith grasps truth. So there is a connection. So let's look at the handout. Theism is not fideism. Theism is grounded in the clarity of general revelation. So if it is clear that God exists, that all people could know it through reason, then theism has its ground in general revelation. Fideism is belief without proof or understanding what is clear. And that's not the traditional historic theistic position. It comes about historically and probably connected to skepticism. It seems as though skepticism and fideism feed off of each other in the history of philosophy. As truth is inseparable from meaning, or meaning is more basic than truth, so faith is inseparable from reason. So faith has reasons. Faith has understanding, and you can have a test of your faith. A trial of faith is a test of your understanding. Usually it's a test of your understanding of the good. Do you really believe this is the good? Or do you have competing views of the good in you? All right, so that's enough about faith and reason. So they're not opposed to each other. They're not antagonistic, faith and reason. They're necessarily connected. So hopefully that overcomes some of your other objections about faith and reason. And I'm a person of science. I'm not a person of religion. Those are some other dichotomies, right? So science, has proof. No, science has the scientific method, which also isn't certainty. It's weak justification. And you can have strong justification for metaphysics. I think we just did that. Okay, so you could be a person of science and a person of religion. Weird, huh? Okay, so what I want to do next, though, is look at the objections. So I've just built up theism, but what are the objections to theism? So next we're going to look at David Hume and the problem of evil. So maybe in the history of philosophy, fideism comes about because of skepticism. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Maybe skepticism comes about by fideism. But let me tell you a little bit of the background on David Hume. He was a Scottish philosopher, the son of a pastor, a Presbyterian minister, who was at the height of the Scottish Enlightenment. So David Hume seems to have been an intellectual young man. I imagine he had a lot of questions about what he was raised with in the theism he was raised in, and perhaps he asked questions and didn't get a satisfactory answer and went into skepticism. He is an empiricist. He does think all of our knowledge is through the senses, and when you follow empiricism consistently, you come to skepticism. He even came to the point of denying that we could know causation, that one thing causes another. So he kind of goes into a radical skepticism, and he challenges the proofs for the existence of God, the traditional proofs. I should just, since we're talking about the philosophy of religion, I should tell you about those proofs. The proofs are classed into three categories. The first is called the ontological argument, and it argues from the idea of God to the existence of God. And St. Anselm is the most popular person who put out the ontological argument. Descartes also did a version of the ontological argument. You can look this up on Google, or you can take Philosophy of Religion. But it's a priori argument, meaning it's not based on experience. It's based on thinking. So this argument has some appeal. I think it's a fascinating argument, but David Hume and Immanuel Kant brought objections to this argument that were thought to be devastating. The second classification of arguments is called the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument was popularized by some Muslim philosophers. They have what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. You can Google that. And St. Thomas Aquinas develops his 5 ways, and 4 of those ways are the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument, the theme of the arguments, there are many people who have given this argument. The theme of it is that we can argue from change in the world to some cause of that change, from movement to an unmoved mover. Aristotle also gave a kind of cosmological argument. So again, David Hume brought arguments against the cosmological argument, and there have been contemporary philosophers who have tried to revive that argument. One popular philosopher of religion is named William Lane Craig. He tried to bring back this Kalam argument. I like it. I think it does part of the work, but he thinks it does 100% of the work and proves God. I don't know about that. It may argue that the material world had a beginning. It's not eternal, but I don't know that it gets us to God. So you need to do more work. And then there's a third category of arguments called the teleological argument. Telos means end or design or goal, that things are created with design, and so there must be some designer. And there's 2 versions of this teleological argument. The first version is the natural design argument. So there's order in the world. There must be some origin of that order. It must be a thinking being, so it must be God. William Paley first popularized this argument. Actually, Aquinas probably did in his 5th way, but William Paley is another person who came up with the design argument. And it's also been refreshed recently in the intelligent design movement. So they give arguments for there's order in the world, there must be some mind behind it, God. Then there's the moral argument and the teleological argument. So there are moral standards, universals in human history, in our thinking. There must be a moral lawgiver. So Kant seems to have thought this argument worked in a way. Kant liked the moral argument, but David Hume and Immanuel Kant were 2 philosophers who brought arguments against those arguments. So remember, philosophy proceeds by argument, counter-argument. So the thing to do for a theist, if they want to maintain their claims, would be to give a counter-argument to Hume and to Kant. Okay, so that's what we look at in the philosophy of religion. The arguments for God, the arguments against, and can these arguments be countered? The counter arguments. So we'll do some of that with David Hume and the problem of evil, but I think it's good to bring up the skepticism. So what I do want to add, one more piece, is that the skepticism of Hume caused some to turn away from theism, but it also caused some to become fideistic. And Immanuel Kant comes after Hume, and he saw the skepticism of Hume, and he also was raised a theist, and he didn't like the skepticism of Hume, so he thought he would try to fix it. So Kant takes empiricism and rationalism and tries to marry them, and he says there's a division between the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. The phenomenal realm is the phenomenon we experience here, and we know it through our senses. The noumenal realm is the realm of the non-physical, God, the soul, the ground of morality. Those are things we can't know through our senses. So this is where fideism comes in. We just have to posit those things and believe them. So see the connection between skepticism and fideism. Because of the empiricism, we really can't know, because our senses are the primary way of knowing. We have to posit these things and just believe. So Kant contributes to the modern and postmodern skepticism which we currently have now. So can we give a counter argument to Hume and Kant? That's the challenge for theism. Okay, so next time, again, I went long, we want to look at the problem of evil. This time we talked about general revelation, special revelation, the relationship between the two, and we talked about faith and reason, and a little bit about the philosophy of religion and what that entails. All right, thanks. Next time, the problem of evil, we're going to look at David Hume.